After years of Democratic lawfare against conservatives and Republicans, is it justice or is it revenge when the rules finally get applied both ways? Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So, you want to learn how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure, or improve your pump at the gym? Stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode, or just go ahead and scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. You'll see a little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. But first, let's go ahead and dig into all things lawfare. Yes, this has been the topic of conversation for, it seems, far too long, at least the past decade. So how did we get here? Where are we going? And is there a way out of this? Joining me here to discuss all that and more is Michael Wynne. Michael, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. So, Michael, we're obviously going to be talking all things lawfare, but before we jump into the topic of conversation today, do the audience a favor, do your truly a favor, and let's go ahead, go through a little bit of the biography. Who is Michael Wynne? And tell us a little bit more about your history in the world of law, legalese, and hopefully not lawfare.
Yeah, no, I was born in Syracuse, New York. I went to Bucknell and to Harvard Law School. Moved as quickly as I could to the great state of Texas. I've been here ever since, first with a firm here. Then I was an assistant United States attorney for about 12 years. Went to McDermott, Will & Emery as a partner, and then launched my own firm here. We've been here for, about 6 years or so, litigation boutique in Houston. So
there you go. And you're from Syracuse, you said. So elephant in the room. I'm from upstate New York, about 2 hours north, where you were in Syracuse, up in the North Country there. So I understand why you left when you did. Not only is the state not exactly the most friendly to folks in the right side of the aisle, but also those winters they get pretty tough.
That's pretty much. It's beautiful for about 2 months of the year, but the winters are brutal. So when I had the opportunity, I miss a lot of people up there, but I had to leave.
Yep, I'm right there with you. All my family's still up there, but alas, yeah, you got to do the right thing. So I'm right there with you. But Michael,
Orange.
let's go ahead and say that again.
Go Orange! Hopefully, basketball can do it this year.
There you go. That's right, Jim Boeheim, man. That's my old favorite coach in college basketball. I know I used to battle my Duke basketball friends back in the day with Coach K. And I was like, come on, Jim Boeheim. He's a man from Ogdensburg, New York, up in my neck of the woods. So, hey, what can I say? But yeah, no, go Orange 100%. Michael, let's go ahead and have some fun. And I know warfare, our lawfare, that is not necessarily a fun conversation, but, we've been hearing this term tossed around all over the place lately. I think it would be a good way to start the conversation. Just what is lawfare? I mean, it's heard so much. Is it relevant from the way it's actually being expressed, or are we saying something that's not actually what it is? Help us better understand lawfare. And is it all partisan, or is it actually got some meat on the bones?
Look, it is partisan. There's no way going around that. It has been growing over the years, fueled by your 24-hour news cycle. I'm not sure how we correct that. It's also important to distinguish between your sort of civil lawfare, which is where the name is really coined, and then sort of prosecutions, if we say, that are directed at particular individuals' political persuasions. Let me break down the civil part, first. Particularly following 2020, a lot of non-governmental organizations, League of Women Voters, NAACP Legal Fund, Mi Familia, and others say that were founded by particular sort of political figures. One set up by Stacey Abrams in Georgia comes to mind. And they filed a number of lawsuits under the KKK Act, which which carries a huge stigma, and Section 11B of the Voting Rights Act, claiming that political activity, free speech, if you will, by groups that tended to lean right, amounted to voter intimidation and efforts to suppress. Now, that's the area I'm perhaps most familiar with, and I think that's where the area was coined, where you would bring really frivolous lawsuits. An example would be, let's see, we handled one out in Colorado involving a group of mostly senior citizens who were going door to door and verifying the state voter rolls. Well, God bless them, people have enough time to do that, but they're certainly not intimidating individuals. Moreover, that case had a number of other issues where the organization sued was not actually canvassing in that county. Problem is, those kinds of things drain, so many resources and contributions from sort of the other side. They end up being frivolous lawsuits, but they freeze everything in place, and you got to devote all your resources to fighting that. And those are your civil cases. What we're seeing now with the switch in power in the White House, it's not really the same thing. What we're using the phrase for is looking at potential criminal investigations of people who are in the prior administration or active in the prior administration. And you got to say there's a little bit there, perhaps in response to some of the targeted investigations and prosecutions of the president, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, and by the way, this has been raised up constantly, right, over the past few years. It's the threat to democracy. These are unprecedented times. So when you start to make these very emotionally charged claims, especially from our friends on the left, it opens the door to say, okay, well, what tools do we have in the proverbial tool belt to help fix this situation, which is where I think we've gotten to where we are today, where this just becomes the number one go-to for a lot of the ways they're trying to remedy, air quotes, remedy on the situation.
Yeah, the two situations are entirely different. What we experienced in the quote lawfare was attacks on individual grassroots citizens trying to exercise their First Amendment rights. Now, were ballot boxes being unlawfully or improperly used? Were people, submitting ballots for people other than themselves? And sure, we had people who tend to lean right. I had one where a group set up essentially a tailgate party 100 yards away from a voting booth. Now, all right, they have a free speech right to do that. Is it strange? Is it bizarre? Yes. But does that constitute targeted discrimination to intimidate anyone, minority or otherwise, from voting? No, but these individuals get named as plaintiff in lawsuits and allegations they violated the KKK Act. You might as well brand them for the rest of their life. That's the lawfare. That's the chilling impact that the left employed quite successfully, I'll say, including against, say, my client, True the Vote. Ms. Engelbrecht and Greg Phillips ended up spending almost a week, in prison due to one of these left-funded organizations for declining to reveal a confidential source. That's all politically motivated. They were exposing the fact that judicial polling, sort of the staffing and hours, some of that was being stored on a server in China. Right or wrong, that's what the state local election officials were doing, primarily in blue cities.
All right, folks, elephant in the room. The world's a mess. Inflation is crushing savings. Politicians keep spending. So what's your backup plan? Oh, you don't have one. Well, if you don't worry. That's why the Expat Money Online Summit exists. From October 10th through the 12th, my good buddy Mikkel Thorup's bringing in global experts to show you how to protect your wealth, secure a second residency, lower your taxes, and even own property abroad. And by the way, it's totally free. So no flights, no hotels, just grab your ticket and tune in. And this year, the focus is on Latin America, with booming opportunities in countries like Argentina, El Salvador, Panama, and Paraguay. These doors are open right now, but only if you take action. And how do you do that? Well, head to expatmoneysummit.com and reserve your free, yes, I said free ticket. And by the way, if you want a full VIP package, you can use promo code TBNS for 20% off. That's expatmoneysummit.com, promo code TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
They exposed that. They won't say how they got it because it's a confidential source. In fact, an FBI informant, FBI back then, threw the guy in the grease, and my clients go to prison till we're able to get the Fifth Circuit to take him out. That's the lawfare. It's an effort to kind of create this, I think the word is stochastic environment of intimidation, and then inhibit free speech and divert resources, from conservative causes. Very different. That's lawfare, using the law to engage in political war against your opponents. And they did it. They did it, I got to tell you, somewhat successfully.
Yeah. I want to pivot towards the other side of the aisle, because where we are today is the Trump administration is seemingly going, full steam ahead in trying to go after some of these nefarious forces now on the left-hand side of the aisle. And I'm seeing a lot of my friends on the left saying, hey, from a rule of law standpoint, is it really, morally right to so-called, fight fire with fire? And we're seeing right now that the number one bugaboo is with James Comey. Everybody's using this as the example. He's a political target in this case. So help us better understand from what happened during the Trump administration, or before the Trump administration, part two, with the Biden administration, to your point, going after individuals to stifle their free speech. And now what we're seeing with the Trump administration targeting folks like James Comey, for example, or take it a step further, like George Soros. Apparently, he's now being targeted potentially by the DOJ. So just help us better understand, what is that fine line there between going after individuals who just are speaking what they believe versus going after individuals like a James Comey or like a George Soros or whoever else kind of in that same school?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, with regard to the civil lawsuits we're just talking about, and targeting, if you will, conservative groups who are looking at and successful in identifying problems with the integrity of our elections. And I'll use there for an example, machines trying to match up signatures using AI. You got a signature on a passport or something, you got a machine trying to match it. All kinds of opportunities. We looked in, behind the curtains and saw some big problems there. But that wasn't necessarily an administration, that is Biden administration push. That was groups engaging in, civil lawfare, unrighteous and wrong and funded, funded by your left-wing organization. I can hesitate to name. Now people's claiming that the Trump administration is, quote, targeting its enemies. I wish they would go back for a minute and look at what was happening 2 years ago. Right or wrong, they all had one man in the crosshairs, and it didn't matter what the charge was, if there was any evidence, if there was anything. I mean, that raid on Mar-a-Lago was a national disgrace, complete disgrace, with the boats and all that. Man, that's another issue, the breadth of search warrants and misuse of them that we see today. Now, is it the same? I'm not so sure. First of all, anybody who tries to lodge that complaint, and it was in support of the ones 2 years ago, is a complete hypocrite and needs to shut their mouth. Okay? Now, just shut their mouth. Let's rewind a little bit, because Trump endured absolute hell. And he was, they purposely tried to humiliate him right there in a state court in New York. Those indictments in Georgia were a joke. Same day they came down, I had lunch with one of the 18 or 19. He was a Lutheran priest. He'd asked for one or two donations. He's indicted in Georgia. Absolutely crazy. As for Comey, what we have there, and I've looked at it, it's a very narrow, righteous charge. I don't know how you get around it. As a prosecutor, I think targeting is the wrong word. Examining, looking at, focusing upon There's a theory or a phrase that I'd heard when I was a federal prosecutor, find me the man, I'll find the crime. To a degree, there's some truth to that because, the federal code, I'll show you, it's like that. Okay? You're going to find something.
A light read.
You, me, and just about anybody you want to find. Okay? So that's, of course, you're going to look at a person that you suspect is going to be responsible for some wrongs. Now, Mr. Comey, he shouldn't be surprised. I mean, he inserted himself in some very challenging situations with regard, to the Hillary Clinton campaign, these Russia allegations. Yeah, he stepped right into that. And if you step right into that, the greatest feat of strength is telling the truth. And he was asked a couple of questions, pointed questions, by a very good lawyer, Ted Cruz, and apparently he didn't tell the truth. All right, so, fishing for something to indict Trump along with 19 other people and focusing on one statement are very, very, very different. And Bolton, I don't think that the raid on his home was any type of military operation that was done on Trump's. And he's got an obligation. He'd inserted himself into the public sphere, subjecting himself to heightened scrutiny. Sure. And then Soros, I don't know where he gets all the money. I've defended, prosecuted and defended election cases involving the donation of campaign funds. And, I think if it hasn't come so far, you got to shine a light on it and take a look at it. I'm not surprised by that at all. Again, it's an individual who thrust themselves into the spotlight, not, a group of senior citizens trying to exercise their civic duty and double check the voting rolls in some rural area in Colorado. Very different, very different. And those people who are self-righteous now, God, go back and look at the tapes from 2 years ago. You got nothing to say. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, and let's look at the James Comey, the James Comey indictment with a microscope really quick, because I've been hearing from a lot of folks in more of the left-leaning political space, and even candidly on the corporate news still. They're making they're almost muddying the water to start. They're saying, well, this indictment, it's on shaky ground. It really doesn't have a lot of legs to it. And I'm thinking back, like, I'm old enough to remember the James Comey from the Russiagate hoax and not going to go ahead and try President or Secretary Clinton because it looked like she just did something negligently, not willfully malicious. So I think both sides of the aisle look at Comey with, a little bit of a raised eyebrow, but just this narrative that there's nothing there in terms of going forward with an indictment. Obviously, there has to be something of substance for us to actually have a case carrying forward. So can you better help us understand what's actual truth versus what is the narrative being promoted by more of the partisan activists?
Well, look, with that Hillary Clinton cell phone incident and sending message using different email addresses, all right, that's arguably clumsy. Okay, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I'm sure that many, many times I picked up the wrong phone. Okay, nobody's going to bother me. Hillary Clinton's a different game, different level. All right, so that's a complicated situation. James Comey, I cannot emphasize enough that it is really one question posed by Senator Cruz during a congressional hearing that was critical. He lies. As a result, we have the Robert Mueller investigation that cost untold amount of money, as well as national attention that could have been paid to other issues and other pressing problems. And how long was that Mueller report? I don't know. I tried to read it. But if he would have told the truth, even if it would have been embarrassing or harmful to Ms. Clinton or someone else, we wouldn't have had that. And the best prosecution is one that's narrowly tailored. Did he do it or did he not? One other point on that, the grand jury apparently was split, and there were a few dissenters from returning a true bill. Now that suggests to me that there was some conversation and debate in the grand jury room about whether to return an indictment. That's good news. That means that both sides were likely presented with evidence for and against. So a group of people, citizens, scrutinized this thing before returning an indictment. It's not just a political rubber stamp. I find that encouraging and suggesting that, there was some there, and it's got pretty solid legs as far as I'm concerned.
I think one of the big concerns that folks had was the seemingly the innocuous truth or post that Trump did over on Truth Social that looks like it maybe was trying to be an email and he hit the wrong app or whatever, and he basically reaches out saying, Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, we have to move forward. That the time is shrinking for us to actually bring a case against Comey. I believe it was a 5-year period where you could actually raise these charges, and it was going to be expiring here at the end of September. So the fact that he posted that, I think there's a lot of folks out there who they see that and they say, well, is this the DOJ? And with that being Pam Bondi, is this them truly being independent, or is this being now weaponized by the Trump team? And I see you shaking your head. Help us better understand the differences there.
Look, everybody's got their style. Every leader has their style. The president has his style. Okay. Very different from mine. I think mine is a little more laid back. Yours is different for you. Yours works for you. The president, maybe sometimes he overstates things, uses some hyperbole, but that's him. That's his style. That's his message. And he's a cheerleader for things that he feels strongly about. He's an advocate, and he lets you know, when he's getting out for something. There's something good to be said about making your intentions clear. Just because the president sent that tweet or social media message, whatever it ended up being, to Pam Bondi does not mean Pam Bondi, who is a professional, prosecutor and has a distinguished career, that she's going to say, okay, we're going to return an indictment. Not the way it works, all right? That individual assistant U.S. attorney has the discretion, and I know, there was a dispute over the U.S. attorney himself. It's not ultimately his decision, his or her decision. It's the individual assistant U.S. attorney presenting it, and then it's a decision of those grand jurors, okay? And the president, I'll tell you, was not talking to those grand jurors. They were the ones who returned their indictment. They're the ones who made the decision. So, yeah, the president can, and every president has, and every president always will, and every governor. They're going to tout and root for their own agenda, and they're going to encourage the people who support them to follow through on their policies. The president did not direct this indictment. It was presented by an assistant U.S. attorney, not the new U.S. attorney, and voted upon by an independent grand jury consistent with the Constitution, and it'll be adjudicated by, if it gets to trial, by a jury selected consistent with the Constitution. I said, the president sends out an email to one of his cabinet members doesn't mean that every action they take afterwards is going to be subservient to or submissive to. If she were that kind of person, the president wouldn't have her as attorney general.
So when's the last time you really thought about your heart health? No, not after just a bad checkup or after seeing a loved one go through something scary, but really thought about it. And the reality is most people don't until it's too late. We chalk it up to fatigue, brain fog, or, just high blood pressure, or hey, maybe we're just getting older, or it's that dreaded stress. But the root cause might be something deeper. Your body's production of nitric oxide dropping off. That one molecule plays a critical role in keeping your arteries open, your blood pressure normal, and your cells oxygenated. And without enough of it, you're not performing at the best mentally or physically. And that's why I've been taking Cardio Miracle for 2 years now. It's a nitric oxide powerhouse packed with over 50 ingredients like organic beetroot, L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3 that are all clinically proven to help support circulation, reduce inflammation, and supercharge your energy levels. It's not just heart support, it's whole body support. So if you're tired of feeling off, give your heart and your health the boost it needs. Just click the link in the show notes or scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to start your journey today. Discount already applied. Just look for the note, "You're shopping with Brian Nichols" at checkout. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
On the flip side of this conversation, and I know this probably seems like it's coming out of left field, but on the flip side of this conversation, there comes the Epstein conversation, right? Where you're seeing right now the administration, I'm not going to go on board with them saying it's a hoax, right? But obvious pressure from Trump and such onto the DOJ saying, let's reel this back some. This could hurt some very important people, more or less some of the things that have been said on the record. So what are you seeing as the difference between, something where we're actually going after folks who have committed actual wrongdoing, as what we're seeing now with the Comey indictment, but then compare and contrast that to something so egregious, so sensationalized, and frankly, the reason it's in everybody's purview is because it led the news for years, it seems like, with all the Epstein insanity. So why do you think that there is such a discrepancy between, the Trump administration and the Trump DOJ going after folks who some would argue are political folks versus basically pulling the entire thing back with the Epstein investigation, because it seems like it might be dancing on a fine line of going after folks who are warmer, if not allies, to the Team Trump?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. We'll try to break it down. The Comey indictment, based on one lie that caused a huge distraction, cost, Mueller investigation, and diversion of resources from issues directly impacting this country that we could have been addressing, perhaps putting our economy and our society in a much better spot right now. Okay, there's a real important public focus going forward. Epstein, all right, what he did was absolutely horrific. Epstein also met his end. Right? And his primary co-conspirator has met hers. So what exactly, we got to dig into it. I'm not by any means absolving anyone who might be on any list, existent or not. What really are we doing by spending so much of our national attention examining and re-examining this? I imagine whatever records that exist are going to be somewhat difficult to decipher. I think it's probably unlikely that somewhere in the bowels of DOJ there's a list of individual pedophiles or perverts, one by one, their email address and contact information. I think that's unlikely. There's no list of that sort. What you might be looking at is various texts and emails that will, it's kind of hard to say, but it is the case, will be taken entirely out of context. And as soon as you pull back whatever curtain you're going to pull back, you may get a few who have done reprehensible things, but you're going to get a lot named there who haven't. Okay, and a lot of that cannot be undone. The bottom line is that the Comey incident is narrow and discreet, involving one person who thrust himself into the public eye testifying before Congress. The other may involve who knows what. Now, no, I don't think that release or non-release of anything should be politically motivated, but whatever is done needs to be calculated, to protect at least the privacy of anybody else's name who's tangentially associated, who could be CC'd to what email about what, or tagged on to some other piece of one. Again, not condoning anyone who might have been a patron of that group. It's just that in this instance, discretion is the better part of valor. And I've seen so many emails, including as a prosecutor, being taken wildly out of context. And that would be, catastrophic for individuals who have families and so forth, all of a sudden to find themselves, exposed to something like that. Moreover, again, I think we need to examine, I say it with some hesitation, the prurient interest that might be inherent in trying to get, quote, all of the information. Why exactly are we doing that? Why? You know, I think there's beyond the go after, prosecute the perpetrators and kind of a prurient curiosity of some of us. I think the main people have been got or are dead. It's time to assist the quote victims, and if those individuals can identify perpetrators, that's fine. Going public like something like this is going to distract the national attention, and perhaps hurt innocent people who are wrapped up in some of these communications. That's how I feel about it.
So I've not really dug into the whole Epstein thing at length here on the show, but if I had to give kind of the spark notes understanding, at least from my perspective, of why so many folks are really still so stuck on the Epstein thing, is that I think there's an overarching belief that, to your point, it's Epstein and his confidant Ghislaine Maxwell, who they were basically the two real point people here. I think there is a belief, Michael, that might be the case. However, behind the scenes was Epstein part of something bigger, right? And I think this feeds into what we're seeing right now with the American support of Israel, and you look at the Gaza conflict over there. And there's a lot of folks here in the States who are raising eyebrows saying, well, is our support of Israel and what they're doing over in Gaza, is that because there's folks like Jeffrey Epstein who, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe were working for the Mossad. And, with, I think it was Epstein who was best friends there with the former prime minister of Israel. So there's this narrative that exists more in the conspiracy side of things. However, I think that's why folks don't want to let it go, because they look at what they think is the underlying stuff that's in the treasure trove, and they're saying that will impact all these other different areas, not just the horrific actions that Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell were taking in trafficking underage girls to very wealthy elite individuals here in the States. With that little nugget of conspiracy, I think that's where a lot of folks, they really want to pay attention, because they think that if they are able to start peeling back layers of the onion, that they're going to find a there, right? So I'm not giving credence one way or the other, but more so I think that's the overarching kind of vibe behind why people don't want to let it go. But with that being said, right, I guess the main question is, here we are today, we're recording in 2025. The Lawfare piece is a conversation that more and more folks are paying attention to. They're aware it's happening. And unfortunately, you're going to have a partisan lens from both sides of the camps, right? You're going to have the left's going to say, this is Trump being partisan. He's targeting individuals like Comey or Bolton or Soros. And on the right-hand side of the aisle, you're going to have the exact same narrative going, they're going after Trump, they're going after Giuliani, they're going after his lawyers, and the list goes on and on. I guess what I'm hoping to get from our conversation today is there a way out? Is there a way that we can actually get out of this lawfare type of mentality and get back to some semblance of civility without having to worry about speaking freely and then having the DOJ knock on your door or the likes? Or are we way too past that, and this is the new normal?
Okay, look, I was reading, strangely enough, Lincoln's first inaugural address yesterday. Okay, I spend my time strangely. And this country has endured far, far, far worse. Okay, far worse. And we've come through it. We're resilient. Get back to our founding principles, and we'll be fine. One other thing about Trump. I ask everybody watching this and everywhere, if you had suffered through what Trump suffered through past year before his election, wouldn't you do the same darn thing? And I'm going to switch targeting to focusing upon, scrutinizing. Okay, you're going to pick who you're going to scrutinize, but there ain't anybody within sound of this, my ear or yours, who wouldn't be doing the same darn thing. We're all human beings, so cut the guy some frickin' slack. All right? And, third parties will decide whether there's anything to it. But, man, I'd be doing a whole heck of a lot worse where I heat. Now, in terms of how do we get out of it, I think there needs to be some regulation of the 24-hour news cycle. You got CNN and The View versus Fox. And, I enjoy Fox, enjoy Gutfeld. I think they're real funny. But, we got to get back to news as news and not just this sort of confirmation bias. And that is going to go a long way to resolve any issue. Most people spend most of their time.
Really quick, I don't mean to interrupt, Michael. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What would that look like? How would you regulate that?
I'm not sure how you regulate it. I really don't. What you end up, everything is motivated by economic incentives. So we got to figure out a way to tie some economic benefit to reporting, there's more going on in the world every day than you see on either CNN, The View, Fox, or whatever it is on a given night, where they're going to linger on one story, the same clips over and over and over. All right, and I'm a Fox News fan, I'll say that, but I'll tell you what, I get bored of the same thing. So let's create an economic incentive somehow to encourage these stations to report on other things. Doesn't have to be political one way or the other. There's a lot going on in the world. The French Prime Minister resigned again yesterday. Why? I think that's the only way, because this is how these things are reinforced. And it's driven by economics because, you get the advertisers willing to pay for the same content. That's what we need to focus on.
Michael, this has been a great conversation. I just looked at the time. I've already kept you over. I'm apologizing for that before we wrap up. So do me a favor and do the audience a favor. Bring us home. What do you like the audience to take away from today's conversation? And of course, where can folks go ahead and reach out to you if they got some questions after today's episode? They want to go ahead and pick your brain.
Sure. Again, Michael Wynne, Wyne, email mwin@gwafirm.com. And just reach out anytime. I love not only helping people see them through problems legally, but also, just hearing different points of view. Now, what is the way out and what would I have is just more plain, flat out reading, more balanced, more comprehensive, in-depth news, And I know that may be pie in the sky with our short attention span. The Economist, BBC, NPR, there's a lot of sources out there. But also, I think another thing is engaging in real conversation with people with differing points of view. We're so isolated from one another, but really engage, listen. I sometimes had a timer, right, in some trials. I'll say, okay, I'll take both sides together. You got 2 minutes to talk, stop. 2 minutes to talk. Or even a child's game of taking a ball, right? Take the ball, you talk, instead of talking over each other all the time. That's where we need to go. Our country has overcome so much worse. We can do this too. We can do this.
Yeah, we had this little thing back in the 1860s. What was it called? The Civil War? Yeah, we made it out of that somehow. So fingers crossed we never get to that point there, Michael. But to your point, we've gone through some stuff, and I hope you're right that we can get over this. And hey, if history is any sign of what we can learn from in terms of what we can see coming ahead, I think we're going to be in a good spot. So with that being said, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, go ahead and give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on X, Instagram, and Facebook. As for the show, if you want to go ahead and catch the show on your favorite video platforms, head to YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, or X. We upload the show in its entirety, and we live stream those on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern. Or if you'd like to take your podcast on the go, head to your favorite podcast catcher like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it may be. And of course, search for The Brian Nichols Show, hit subscribe, and hit that little notification bell, because we have at least 3 episodes every week. They're going to, I guarantee, leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. And one last ask, and that is, if folks, you enjoyed what we talked about here in today's episode, please support the show by supporting the folks who support us, and that is our sponsors like Cardio Miracle, the Expat Money Summit, and the likes. All those links can be found at briannicholsshow.com/sponsors. Michael, I'll let you get the final word in today. Anything you want to say goodbye to the audience with?
No, one other thing, in terms of looking forward, we have the best structure in terms of our government, our economy, and our society. Free enterprise foundations were built on You know, if anybody can overcome it, this country can, because we have the mechanisms to do it.
Here. Alrighty, sir. Well, I think we'll go ahead and say goodbye then. With that being said, folks, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Michael Wynne. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.